A very warm welcome to OBN Horn of Africa. You're watching our weekly program Talk to OBN. This is our weekly program. In this edition today, we'll be talking about the significance of having a great narrative in nation building and to have all-inclusive history amongst people in Ethiopia particularly. I joined by a state minister and political commentator, Dr. Birhanu Lenjiso, to discuss on this matter. Stay tuned. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Okay, to begin with, what is the political point of view of great narrative or narrative?
Thank you, Adisu. Thank you for having me, particularly on this very important topic. Narrative actually is very important. It's a very significant thing in human life. Basically, because we are a story, right? Narrative is, in a simple term, a story that we tell. It comes from the Latin word narrare, which means to tell. So we are all story. We are the story we tell. And the meaning that we have in society, or the meaning that we attach to certain thing, gives it the meaning it holds. So from that perspective, narrative is everything. Story is everything. And having common story, common narrative, is actually the heart of being a nation. To be a nation, to be a country, we need to have something that we share in common. And that thing that we share in common is something that we tell to each other and also to others. So politics is built on narrative. And it is a very, very significant part of any nation. Those nations who have built a great narrative, a grand narrative, significant narrative, appear to be very strong, and countries who fail to coin their narrative in a proper way and fail to share their narrative among its citizens and also to other nations are actually weak countries. So the strength and the weakness of a country depends on the type of narrative they have.
Okay, it's been told that Ethiopia is endowed with a very rich history. Talking from a perspective of narrative, how would those stories designed?
So, yes, history, story, and narrative. History by itself, the mere happening or the mere existence of event by itself doesn't make any change if you don't know how to narrate, if you don't know how to tell. Before we come to history, actually, if you take the current species of human being called Homo sapiens, it is another name is actually Homo narratus, which means a storytelling creature, or a species whose life is changed or influenced by its ability to tell a story. So storytelling is very important. Having a great history is one thing, but agreeing on that history or taking the strong side of that history as a strong and telling it together, narrating it together is another thing. The problem in Ethiopia is not the problem of history. I don't think history has ever been a problem anywhere. If history is a problem, actually, it should have been a problem in European countries than elsewhere in the world, because these countries fought one of the deadliest wars. But after that, they happen to form this very strong union called the European Union. So history is not a problem. The problem is how we understand history, how we narrate history, how we relate ourselves to history. And the headache of Ethiopia is that one. Mm-hmm. It's not the history itself that's a problem. It is the way we narrate it. It is the way we relate to each other based on that particular event. So from that perspective, the main problem, the main issue, the main headache of Ethiopia is narrative. How we narrate our history, past events.
Okay, in my intro I raised, this grand narrative is very important and very significant in nation building so as to have a very unifying nation. Mm-hmm. To what extent would this play significant role in nation building?
So, nation building, this concept is a bit fluid, and especially when people look at it from in relation to state building, usually it lacks clarity, not only in our country but also globally. So countries like Ethiopia are actually built on two pillars. One is the pillar of state building, where we create the government institutions or something that define a country as a recognized country globally. So this includes having a clear border, people, government, recognition from external bodies, and also sovereignty. If you look at the Ethiopian state, the Ethiopian state actually fulfill all this. We have a clear border, we have people, we have culture, we have government, we have sovereignty for quite a long time, over 115 years. So the Ethiopian state building, with all its problems, is more or less complete. What is missing in Ethiopia is actually the nation building that you mentioned. What is nation building? Nation building is creating a consensus between people who live in this state. In Ethiopia, we have a diverse group living in this country with different language, different culture, different tradition, different history, different narrative. So what is nation building from that perspective is to create that narrative that everybody shares. A narrative that everybody say, this is what we share, this is what we own together, this is our history together, this is what we can generally call a grand narrative, a comprehensive account of the people of this country. So this nation building is a suspended homework of Ethiopians, and since the reform, since 2018, the government has been trying to create this platform where people discuss and agree on what we can call as our grand narrative. That is usually what is created through a national dialogue process. At the end of the day, the national dialogue actually gives you what you own together, what you share together, what you narrate together, what ties you up together. It is something that glue the whole nation in this country together. So it could be what we generally call a grand narrative, a comprehensive account of the nations and nationalities of this country, based on the historical factors we mentioned earlier. But in general, a nation, a country is built on what it is people agree to forget together and what they agree to remember together. So the grand narrative is all about this.
Okay. How were, these narratives affecting history of nationalities and peoples across the years? Maybe political engagements of different nationalities in Ethiopia. Can you just, explicitly put it in rows, the journey that we've arrived here, putting all the happenings, the histories, all the missed political or narrative status quos there?
Yeah, so as I said, the state building with all its problems again, because when we say the state building in Ethiopia was completed around 1898, we do not mean everything is perfect. It has its own flaws. The border demarcations happened after that. There are also changes after that. But we shouldn't forget the fact that the Ethiopian state is one of the oldest states in Africa, and one of the oldest in the world. It is the oldest in Africa and one of the oldest in the world. But although the state building was completed earlier, we couldn't manage to complete the nation building. We couldn't manage to come up with the most unifying kind of narrative in this country. And the result of that gave us this political divide in this country. We have a very big political divide in it. At least we can mention two antagonistic groups. One group say, for example, when they define the identity of Ethiopia itself, they say Ethiopia is a nation that has common culture, even common language sometimes, and the differences you see in this country are sub-national level kind of division. So Ethiopia is a nation, and the other groups we see in this country are either clan or sub-nation. And the other group say Ethiopian nations and nationalities have all the characteristics that make them a nation. And Ethiopia as a country is a country of a multinational country, having over 18 different types of nations and nationalities. So this argument is still going on.
Where is your stand there?
Well, I obviously stand with the group who say Ethiopia is a country of a multinational country. And I believe most nations and nationalities in this country have a unique feature that makes them a nation. That also comes from my sociological definition. But what matters is not where people should stand. It is about the agreement. When we define certain things, we need to have a common ground, a common criteria that we use. If we use, for example, the same criteria, and based on that criteria, this country could be a nation, it doesn't matter. The problem in Ethiopia is everybody has its own standard. So that is the problematic area. If everybody look at certain things only from their own perspective, that will create this kind of division we are having now. So once we disagree, for example, on this point, then we start to label each other. And I label everything you say as wrong, and you label everything I say as wrong. Through this process, we come to have this political antagonism in this country. And the antagonism actually put us in a position where we can't sit down together to discuss and chart our common future. So the grand narrative that is coming up now is again to create that platform where we Ethiopians sit down together to discuss an issue and arrive at a consensus, and from that point to move together forward, having a common definition of what it means to be in this country, what history do we have, what future should we aspire together.
Okay, go and tell me experiences of other nations who have been having that disagreement of having different type of narratives, but later came up having a very grand narrative and unified nation.
Well, I think almost all the countries. If you take, for example, countries where the national dialogue bear fruit, including South Africa, Kenya, Senegal,
Colombia,
Tunisia, these countries actually had problems. If you look at the history of countries, every country almost globally, or at least most of the countries, have similar history with us. Most states are actually created by force, by war. But once the war over, they took the chance to sit down together. Others, for example, first created the country, then they created the nation. If you take, for example, Italy, Italians first created a country called Italy, and then they created Italians. The same is true in Ethiopia. The expansionist war of the 19th century created Ethiopia, but it failed to create Ethiopians because they taught the identities, like, for example, Christianity and the Amharic will glue every nation together. But it didn't work that way. So that is the only point we are missing. And what now His Excellency the Prime Minister and the initiatives like National Dialogue are trying to do is to repair that, to bring that back to the table and to finalize it once and for all. We have a country called Ethiopia, an internationally recognized country, a very sovereign country with a very strong pride, heroic historical achievement, but failing to create a consensus between its citizens is the major issue. Once we resolve that, once Ethiopians agree to come to terms with its past and agree to move together forward, then we have the resources that we need in this country. We have big land mass, we have big water resource, we have big population, we have minerals intact, and Ethiopia has a very big chance to prosper in a very short time after that.
Okay, we have initiated this grand narrative for the coming Ethiopia, right? What will happen? The history is happening.
As I said, history is not a problem by itself, because as I said, if history is a problem, the countries who have the bloodiest history, the worst conflict in the world, World War I and World War II happened in Europe. And that bloodiest, that deadliest war actually gave Europeans the fertile ground to come together to create this supranational institution called the European Union. They showed actually the world that there is no limit for humanity to unite
This is
to
history.
work together.
This is their history. Right?
Yes, they
So-
have the worst history,
Yeah.
but they managed to change that into something very good. And in Ethiopia, we have hiccup.
do we have narrative in European case?
Of course.
For
Of
instance,
course.
for instance.
Look, for example, when they created the European Union, even before they create the European Union, when they started the First World War, the Europeans actually started the World War, naming it the war that will end all the wars in Europe.
Yeah.
Because Europeans, nations, and small nations were fighting with the empires at that time. So there were conflict here and there. So when they started the First World War, they said this will put an end to every kind of conflict in Europe. Unfortunately, it didn't put an end to the conflict. It actually led to another, even more bloody Second World War. But after the Second World War, Europe was devastated. And they bring this steel and the coal factories from 6 countries to try to create some sort of economic tie to actually repair Europe through economy. But that kind of relationship between this steel and the coal factories grow to the European Union. So what brought the European Union, how the European Union grew from the association between coal and the steel factory is the way they narrate their future, the way they understood their history, their war history, and they agreed to put an end to it. That is their agreement. So even this kind of bloody histories push them to come up with something nice. And for us, there are hiccups, there are conflicts, there are bloodshed, of course. There were war like any other country in the world. And if we sit down together, especially this generation, because we are very far from that historical event, while we are actually arguing on that very bad history, we are actually missing a lot today. We couldn't manage to win our own battle today. So Ethiopians should say enough is enough. We have to start to live, start to write our history. This nation, despite all its problems, have stayed intact for over 115 years. So if we put that, mark there and agree to forget certain things together, this is our past bad history. We have to forget this together. And this is the life we want to live together. This is the future we want together. And we have to start this journey from here together. That is the only point we need. Then after, we have all the necessary resources in these countries for Ethiopians to live a peaceful and a more prosperous life than we are living today.
Okay. Prime Minister Abiy stressed on his remark last time, grand narratives play in shaping a nation, fostering positive interaction, creating a shared national identity, and helping citizens stand together and usher in prosperity. So what will it take Ethiopia to come up with such unifying narratives?
What it requires actually is only one thing. It is to decide to agree. When Ethiopians come to the table to discuss, we usually come to the table to disagree. That's a very bad culture. To continue as a country, we need a deliberate consensus. So when we come to the table, we have to come with the intention a deliberation. You come to the table with that intention that we need to agree on certain things. We need to have this grand narrative, a comprehensive story that we tell together. That doesn't mean, by the way, sometimes people think, because when we talk about grand narrative, or meta, they also call it meta-narrative, there is disagreement between modernists and postmodernists. Postmodernists usually say grand narrative has a totalizing nature. But in countries like Ethiopia, grand narrative is not totalizing. Nations and nationalities in these countries have their own histories. They have their own cultures. They have stories that they tell about their unique cultures. But we also need to have that common narrative, that common story that we tell together, that we share together. So it is not totalizing everything, but it is about creating a common history, a common narrative that every Ethiopians, that every citizens of Ethiopia speak to. So it is possible to create that. We already have this kind of narrative in this country. But as I said, because of the political divide, because of the antagonism, the political antagonism we have in this country, we don't usually speak the same language. We don't usually speak toward the same narrative. And now, through the national dialogue and other initiatives, we have to craft this kind of narratives, that all Ethiopians speak to. It is not about making everybody the same, but it is about creating something that we all share as a country, as a citizen of this country.
Okay, this Ethiopian constitution seeking power, maybe political interest, and other, as you have said, mismatch of histories and narratives. These are major things that create contentions among our people. And as a political commentator, what do you advise to have a constitution that will be embraced by all full-heartedly, and what is expected from this generation to submissively accept this is my constitution and I should be guided accordingly? What ought to be done by the entire generation, by the entire citizens in Ethiopia?
Yes, constitution is one of the points that usually come into the picture when people talk about disagreement. Although I personally disagree, because for you to say constitution is a point of contention, first probably everybody needs to know the constitution, and everybody probably needs to abide by the constitution. If you ask me the question, how many people know the constitution in this country, how many people live by that constitution, it's a big question for me. But that doesn't mean that the constitution cannot come as a point of discussion. For me, it is not, the issue is not again what is stated in the constitution. The constitution, actually, if you look at the content, it is one of the beautiful constitutions we ever see in this country. It talks mostly about democratic rights. Most of the articles are about rights, and there are points that we can debate, argue on. And people should actually be free to talk about any article, to disagree about any article. That is fine. But the important point when it comes to constitution is about participation, about contribution toward this drafting of the constitution, issues like that, or articles like, for example, people talk about Article 39. Are they still relevant or not? With another question. But people should talk about anything in this country, and they also agree to create a common meaning, because what we need is a common meaning, a common understanding. For example, we can agree to have certain kind of understanding of the constitutional articles, because articles, you can reinterpret them. That's what happened elsewhere in the world as well. So constitution can be one of the areas where Ethiopians should sit down together to revise when it is needed, because the constitution itself puts an article by which you talk about it and revise it. For me, you know, those are topics. For example, you can talk about symbols, national symbols, starting from flag. You can talk about the constitution. You can talk about our political cultures. You can talk about the relationship between state and religion. You can talk about the relationship between the state and political party and government. You can raise a lot of topics that needs a discussion for us to have, or for us to chart a common future. But it is not a topic that matters now. What matters for me now, to have this grand narrative, is that culture of sitting together on a table, on a round table, with, as I said, with a deliberate intention to agree and to chart that common future together.
Thank you very much. Okay, Dr. Birhanu Lenjiso, thank you for your commentary and analysis on grand narratives.
Thank you very much, Adisa, for having me.
Dear viewers, this brings you the end of our edition for today. See you next time with another edition. Hope you had a wonderful insight on grand narratives and related affairs. Bye-bye.